Hi, this is Lew Rockwell, and this is the Lew Rockwell Show. Today I have the pleasure of sharing with you a recent interview I did on Russia Today.
Well, and the Fed isn't happening quite yet, but it's on its way to getting audited. Congressman Ron Paul's bill to broadly edit the Federal Reserve advanced in the House yesterday. It passed the House Oversight Committee, and members say they hope for a full House vote next month. Paul has been a huge critic of the Federal Reserve, criticizing its policies and lack of transparency. So does this move show that Paul's End the Fed message is resonating with more people? To weigh in on this is Lew Rockwell, chairman of the Ludwig von Mises Institute. Lew, welcome. So it looks like the Fed is moving closer toward an audit. Your reaction?
Well, I'd like to see the Fed moving closer to a hole in the ground myself rather than an audit. But I think this is, of course, a wonderful victory for Ron Paul. Eric Cantor, the number 2 guy in the Republican House, has blocked this bill for years, and he's been persuaded to allow it to come to a vote. I fear that doesn't mean it's going to become law, because there's no way the Senate is going to pass it, no way the president would sign it. On the other hand, the Fed has become an issue. Ron Paul made the Fed an issue for the first time since 1913, when the thing first came into existence. So when you have 8,000 college kids on the Berkeley campus chanting at Ron Paul, "End the Fed," you know that things are changing, and people are right to focus on the Fed. It's a very dangerous institution. It does only evil, only harm to America and the whole world. So the more we focus on it, the more we talk about auditing it, the more we talk about seeing if there's really the gold in their vaults that they claim there is. We look at all the bailouts of the European banks, the American banks. The more we scrutinize everything they're doing, the better off for the cause of freedom and the cause of economic prosperity.
And you had mentioned how this message has spread across college campuses. Of course, Ron Paul with his very young following. But it looks like his message is also spreading to members of Congress.
Well, these guys, I don't want to shock anybody, but they care about being reelected. And it's absolutely true that they're hearing from their constituents. It's amazing how many congressmen get letters saying, "Hey, why aren't you more like Ron Paul?" So it's quite a wonderful thing. And they are, I don't think they've changed their minds. I think they can't be trusted. They're congressmen after all, right? But however, they will respond to public pressure. And there is public pressure. And Chad Parrish was just pointing out to me, even in just regular economic stories, we oftentimes see a picture of the Fed when people are talking about economic troubles. And boy, that is exactly right. Fed is the source of all our economic troubles. Not that the Congress and the presidency, the Supreme Court, these institutions all do huge damage, but the Fed is the foundation of all our economic troubles here in Europe. I'm afraid the coming global depression.
Now, Lew, I do want to read a quote from Congressman Paul. It's a response to this advancing in the House. He says, quote, "It is time for the Federal Reserve to face a thorough audit of its monetary policy and lending operations. The Fed's purchases of dubious assets from favored Wall Street institutions, its lending of hundreds of billions of dollars to foreign governments and central banks, and the prospect of further quantitative easing and European bailouts underscore the critical need for transparency." So, Lew, what might an audit of the Fed reveal?
Well, first of all, it would tell us where the money is going, how much money they're creating. They've created, I think Ron may have even understated it, probably trillions of dollars went to the European banks. Certainly trillions of dollars went to the U.S. banks. We'd like to know, how much did they create? How much, in effect, money did they counterfeit? Who got it? What were the terms? Who were their favored fair-haired boys in the banking industry here and around the world? And, I mentioned, too, the fact they don't want us to know they own all the gold, but they don't want to let anybody look at it. They don't even want it to be counted. They don't want the bars to be assayed. They don't want, especially, an investigation of who actually owns it. There's some questions about this, about who, whether it's foreign central banks, whether the Fed really owns the gold as they claim. All those kinds of questions should be investigated. They should be open to a total transparency and investigation. They should not be allowed to do everything in secrecy like a criminal gang, but of course they are a criminal gang, so I guess that's why they like the secrecy.
Well, so a lot of questions, especially in a time of financial economic turmoil after the recession of 2008. A lot of questions. I mean, what policies of the Federal Reserve could put the economy at risk?
Well, the quantitative easing, the inflation. When the Federal Reserve pushes interest rates below the natural level, and of course now they're almost at zero, When that happens, it brings on the business cycle because it causes business people to make all kinds of investments that seem like a great idea at the time, but when the bust comes, turn out to have been disasters. This is, of course, the story of 2007-8 and many other booms and busts that the Fed creates. It creates recessions and depressions. That's the worst thing the Fed does. So they can actually put us into a global depression in cahoots with the European Central Bank and the Bank of Japan. They're partners in crime. It threatens everything. It threatens everybody's economic future. It threatens our children's economic future. It threatens our grandchildren. I mean, this could go on for a very long time, the hole that they're putting us in. And yet they're immune from being questioned. They're never to be touched. They're never to be inquired into. Bernanke and company should just be able to do whatever they want in a secret room in cahoots with the big banks, and we're not allowed to know. Well, Ron Paul is exactly right. We have a right to know. We have a need to know. If we care about the economy, if we care about all our economic futures and having prosperity and not all being in poverty, we need to know what the Federal Reserve and its compadres in the banking industry are doing to us. And of course, the purpose is to stop them from doing it.
And I do want to mention, Lew, what the opponents of this are saying. They're saying that this is undermining the independence of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is supposed to be politically independent.
Well, that's just eyewash, and it's not politically independent. There's a famous statement by Arthur Burns, who was Richard Nixon's chairman of the Fed and a very bad man, who once, when questioned about this after he was out of the Fed, made a hilarious statement. He said, look, the chairman of the Fed has to do what the president wants, otherwise we'd lose our independence. Now, what the independence means is they all get to live it up. The whole government lives it up, but the Fed is really on the top of Mount Olympus drinking nectar of the gods. They live it up to an unbelievable extent, and they can determine their own expenses and so forth. So that's what they mean. It's not actually independent of the rest of the government.
So you're not buying Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke's argument that this is going to open it up to politics?
Well, the Fed is, of course, a political organization. All it cares about is politics. Its whole concern is just nothing but politics. My view of Bernanke is whatever he says, believe the opposite. Then you'll be right.
All right. I do want to bring up a California Republican. He is the chairman of the committee, Darrell Issa. He said clearly, quote, clearly, the Fed must be made too big to fail, and too big to fail requires a considerable amount of oversight. What do you think about that? Well,
I'm glad to hear Issa say that. And it's an indication of the influence of Ron Paul that, of course, the Fed does need oversight. The notion that this organization, maybe the chairman of the Fed, and certainly in economic and financial matters, the most important, powerful guy in the whole world, why should he be allowed to do whatever he wants in cahoots with Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and Bank of America and the rest of them? Why does he get to do that to the American people, people of Russia, the people of Europe, Latin America, Asia, the people of the whole world? What kind of nonsense is that? Of course he needs oversight. Of course we need transparency. Of course we need to know who's getting the dough. We always know in Congress who's getting the dough. We pretty much know with the presidency who's getting the dough. How come the Fed can put out far more money than Congress or the presidency? Much more money, and yet it's all supposed to be highly secret. The only reason they want to keep it secret is because what they're doing is criminal, what they're doing would embarrass them, and that's why we need to know it and we need to stop it.
All right, so at this point, it is advancing, still needs to pass the House. How do you expect the Senate to deal with this?
No, the House will pass it, I believe, and that's, again, a great thing for Ron. The Senate's not going to pass it. The Senate is in the pocket of the Fed. And, of course, Obama's in the pocket of the Fed. So the Senate won't pass it and the president won't sign it. Nevertheless, Ron has made huge advances, especially with what young people are thinking and calling for. We're going to see some great things ahead. They ought to be scared in the marble palace of the Fed. They ought to be shaking in their striped pants.
All right, Lew, thank you so much for weighing in. We will be keeping a close eye at this bill as it progresses in Congress.
Well, thanks so much for listening to the Lew Rockwell Show today. Take a look at all the podcasts. There have been hundreds of them. There's a link on the upper right-hand corner of the LRC front page. Thank you.